Tonight, you'll be dozing off from the back seat of your parents' car, softly cradled by the gentle hum of the engine as it travels homeward late at night along a country highway. Imagine you are sitting in the back seat with your head nestled into a cozy pillow propped against the window. You are gazing out at the moonlit countryside, and on your face is a soft and secret smile. It's late Friday night after playing in the pep band at your brother's basketball game far from home. Your kid's sister has nodded off already. She's laying across the wide seat with her head resting softly in your lap. You are tired too after a long week of high school and homework, but you're also full of wonder, and that smile on your face is perfectly concealed in the shadows, only illuminated sporadically by the flickering flashes of light cast from the headlights of oncoming cars. You rest your forehead against the cool glass of the window. Every now and then, a distant farmhouse light appears, towering like a lighthouse in the dark, casting bright beams across the endless, waterless ocean of a prairie. Now, slowly we'll begin to relax. First, with eyes closed, just become aware of your breathing, feeling your chest gently rise and fall again. Next, we'll try taking a few deeper breaths, filling our lungs with air, holding it, and then gently exhaling and letting it all go. Ready? Inhale deeply, hold for 3, 2, 1, and then exhale. One more time. Breathe in deeply, hold for 3, 2, 1, and then exhale. And try thinking to yourself, as I sit here in the back seat, I can feel gravity's pull tugging me gently back towards Earth. With every exhale, I can feel the weight of the day slipping away. I can feel my feet, my ankles, calves, knees, and my legs, each part of me relaxing deeper and becoming heavier and more relaxed. Up in the front seat, your parents recap and relive the big game. They talk of jump shots and fouls, rebounds and timeouts. You close your eyes, but when you picture the crowded gymnasium, you remember something much sweeter than basketball. Your mind drifts back, but now the memory of the night is soothing and hypnotic, somehow quieter, as if it all played out in slow motion. Sneakers squeaking on the hardwood floor, cheers blasting out from spirit sections choreographed by cheerleaders and mascots. The aroma of popcorn and hot dogs snaking its way from concessions all the way through the hot air, above the teams and players and referees, and then high into the packed stands where you and the band played and cheered and sang. You quietly reflect on how unexpected your first love appeared in your young life. It feels as if the universe brought it to you slowly, and yet, in the end, also unexpectedly in a flash. Now let's try taking a few more deep breaths. Ready? Breathe in deeply. Hold for 3, 2, 1, and then exhale. Try continuing on your own, and while doing this, try thinking to yourself, as I sit here, my whole body feels heavy and relaxed. With every exhale, I can feel gravity pulling me back towards Earth gently. I can feel my head, my shoulders, my neck becoming relaxed and at ease. And my legs are heavy and at peace with gravity's pull. Now my whole body, my legs and feet, my arms and hands, my torso, my head and neck and shoulders, my whole body is completely at peace, relaxed, and at ease. For weeks and weeks at band practice and at games, you had played right there next to each other, bumping elbows, close enough to catch quick flashes of fragrances, close enough for smiles, quick glances, silly and innocent flirtations without considering really when and where or if you might actually ever kiss. And then, unexpectedly, tonight, it just happened. while the whole gymnasium was on its feet, the whole world preoccupied with some monumental moment of a basketball game. It just happened right there in the minuscule universe between the two of you. When you think about it now, falling in love was a lot like those farmhouse lights out there in the darkness. Everything approached so slowly at first, off in the distance, hardly moving at all. And then, love gained momentum and approached you carefully and timidly, getting closer and closer, and before you knew it, before you both knew it, true love had rushed up on you in a heartbeat, irresistible and suddenly undeniable. You smile now, thinking how you had always imagined your first kiss would happen somewhere private and hidden, and yet, in the end, yours was out in the open and in front of hundreds of people who never even saw it. As your parents dial in the AM radio, you finally close your eyes and lean back.
The Young King by Oscar Wilde, to Margaret Lady Brooke, the Rani of Sarawak. It was the night before the day fixed for his coronation, and the young king was sitting alone in his beautiful chamber. His courtiers had all taken their leave of him, bowing their heads to the ground according to the ceremonious usage of the day, and had retired to the great hall of the palace to receive a few last lessons from the professor of etiquette, there being some of them who had still quite natural manners, which in a courtier is, I need hardly say, a very grave offense. The lad, for he was only a lad, being but 16 years of age, was not sorry at their departure, and had flung himself back with a deep sigh of relief on the soft cushions of his embroidered couch, lying there, wild-eyed and open-mouthed, like a brown woodland fawn, or some young animal of the forest newly snared by the hunters. And indeed, it was the hunters who had found him, coming upon him almost by chance, as, bare-limbed and pipe in hand, he was following the flock of the poor goat-herd who had brought him up, and whose son he had always fancied himself to be. The child of the old king's only daughter by a secret marriage with one much beneath her in station, a stranger, some said, who, by the wonderful magic of his lute-playing, had made the young princess love him, while others spoke of an artist from Rimini, to whom the princess had shown much, perhaps too much honor, and who had suddenly disappeared from the city, leaving his work in the cathedral unfinished. He had been, when but a week old, stolen away from his mother's side as she slept, and given into the charge of a common peasant and his wife, who were without children of their own, and lived in a remote part of the forest, more than a day's ride from the town. Grief or the plague, as the court physician stated, or as some suggested, a swift Italian poison administered in a cup of spiced wine, slew within an hour of her wakening the white girl who had given him birth, and as the trusty messenger who bare the child across his saddle-bow stooped from his weary horse and knocked at the rude door of the goat-herd's hut, the body of the princess was being lowered into an open grave that had been dug in a deserted churchyard beyond the city gates, a grave where it was said that another body was also lying, that of a young man of marvelous and foreign beauty, whose hands were tied behind him with a knotted cord, and whose breast was stabbed with many red wounds. Such, at least, was the story that men whispered to each other. Certain it was that the old king, when on his deathbed, whether moved by remorse for his great sin, or merely desiring that the kingdom should not pass away from his line, had had the lad sent for, and, in the presence of the council, had acknowledged him as his heir. and it seems that from the very first moment of his recognition, he had shown signs of that strange passion for beauty that was destined to have so great an influence over his life. Those who accompanied him to the suite of rooms set apart for his service often spoke of the cry of pleasure that broke from his lips when he saw the delicate raiment and rich jewels that had been prepared for him, and of the almost fierce joy with which he flung aside his rough leathern tunic and coarse sheepskin cloak. He missed indeed at times the fine freedom of his forest life, and was always apt to chafe at the tedious court ceremonies that occupied so much of each day. But the wonderful palace joyeuse, as they called it, of which he now found himself lord, seemed to him to be a new world fresh fashioned for his delight. And as soon as he could escape from the council board or audience chamber, he would run down the great staircase with its lions of gilt bronze and its steps of bright porphyry, and wander from room to room, and from corridor to corridor, like one who was seeking to find in beauty an anodyne from pain, a sort of restoration from sickness. Upon these journeys of discovery, as he would call them, and indeed they were to him real voyages through a marvelous land, he would sometimes be accompanied by the slim, fair-haired court pages with their floating mantles and gay, fluttering ribbons. But more often he would be alone, feeling through a certain quick instinct, which was almost a divination, that the secrets of art are best learned in secret, and that beauty, like wisdom, loves the lonely worshipper. Many curious stories were related about him at this period. It was said that a stout burgomaster, who had come to deliver a florid oratorical address on behalf of the citizens of the town, had caught sight of him kneeling in real adoration before a great picture that had just been brought from Venice, and that seemed to herald the worship of some new gods. On another occasion, he had been missed for several hours, and after a lengthened search had been discovered in a little chamber in one of the northern turrets of the palace, gazing as one in a trance at a Greek gem carved with the figure of Adonis. He had been seen, so the tale ran, pressing his warm lips to the marble brow of an antique statue that had been discovered in the bed of the river on the occasion of the building of the stone bridge, and was inscribed with the name of the Bithynian slave of Hadrian. He had passed a whole night in noting the effect of the moonlight on a silver image of Endymion. All rare and costly materials had certainly a great fascination for him, and in his eagerness to procure them he had sent away many merchants, some to traffic for amber with the rough fisher folk of the North Seas, some to Egypt to look for that curious green turquoise which is found only in the tombs of kings, and is said to possess magical properties, some to Persia for silken carpets and painted pottery, and others to India to buy gauze and stained ivory, moonstones and bracelets of jade, sandalwood and blue enamel, and shawls of fine wool. But what had occupied him most was the robe he was to wear at his coronation, the robe of tissued gold, and the ruby-studded crown, and the scepter with its rows and rings of pearls. Indeed, it was of this that he was thinking tonight, as he lay back on his luxurious couch, watching the great pine-wood log that was burning itself out on the open hearth. The designs, which were from the hands of the most famous artists of the time, had been submitted to him many months before, and he had given orders that the artificers were to toil night and day to carry them out, and that the whole world was to be searched for jewels that would be worthy of their work. He saw himself in fancy standing at the high altar of the cathedral in the fair raiment of a king, and a smile played and lingered about his boyish lips, and lit up with a bright luster his dark woodland eyes. After some time he rose from his seat, and leaning against the carved penthouse of the chimney, looked round at the dimly lit room. The walls were hung with rich tapestries representing the triumph of beauty. A large press inlaid with agate and lapis lazuli filled one corner, and facing the window stood a curiously wrought cabinet with lacquer panels of powdered and mosaicked gold, on which were placed some delicate goblets of Venetian glass and a cup of dark-veined onyx. Pale poppies were broidered on the silk coverlet of the bed, as though they had fallen from the tired hands of sleep, and tall reeds of fluted ivory bare up the velvet canopy, from which great tufts of ostrich plumes sprang like white foam to the pallid silver of the fretted ceiling. A laughing narcissus in green bronze held a polished mirror above its head. On the table stood a flat bowl of amethyst. Outside, he could see the huge dome of the cathedral, looming like a bubble over the shadowy houses, and the weary sentinels pacing up and down on the misty terrace by the river. Far away, in an orchard, a nightingale was singing. A faint perfume of jasmine came through the open window. He brushed his brown curls back from his forehead, and taking up a lute, let his fingers stray across the chords. His heavy eyelids drooped, and a strange languor came over him. Never before had he felt so keenly, or with such exquisite joy, the magic and the mystery of beautiful things. When midnight sounded from the clock tower, he touched the bell, and his pages entered and disrobed him with much ceremony, pouring rosewater over his hands and strewing flowers on his pillow. A few moments after that, they had left the room. He fell asleep. And as he slept, he dreamed a dream, and this was his dream. He thought that he was standing in a long, low attic, amidst the whir and clatter of many looms. The meager daylight peered in through the grated windows and showed him the gaunt figures of the weavers bending over their cases. Pale, sickly-looking children were crouched on the huge crossbeams. As the shuttles dashed through the warp, they lifted up the heavy battens, and when the shuttles stopped, they let the battens fall and pressed the threads together. Their faces were pinched with famine, and their thin hands shook and trembled. Some haggard women were seated at a table sewing. A horrible odor filled the place. The air was foul and heavy, and the walls dripped and streamed with damp. The young king went over to one of the weavers and stood by him and watched him. And the weaver looked at him angrily and said, "Why art thou watching me? Art thou a spy set on us by our master?" "Who is thy master?" asked the young king. "Our master," cried the weaver bitterly. "He is a man like myself. Indeed, there is but this difference between us, that he wears fine clothes while I go in rags, and that while I am weak from hunger, he suffers not a little from overfeeding." "The land is free," said the young king, "and thou art no man's slave." "In war," answered the weaver, "the strong make slaves of the weak, and in peace the rich make slaves of the poor. We must work to live, and they give us such mean wages that we die. We toil for them all day long, and they heap up gold in their coffers, and our children fade away before their time, and the faces of those we love become hard and evil. We tread out the grapes, and another drinks the wine. We sow the corn, and our own board is empty. We have chains, though no eye beholds them, and are slaves, though men call us free." "Is it so with all?" he asked. "It is so with all," answered the weaver, "with the young as well as with the old, with the women as well as with the men, with the little children as well as with those who are stricken in years. The merchants grind us down, and we must needs do their bidding. The priest rides by and tells his beads, and no man has care of us. Through our sunless lanes creeps poverty with her hungry eyes, and sin with his sodden face follows close behind her. Misery wakes us in the morning, and shame sits with us at night. But what are these things to thee? Thou art not one of us. Thy face is too happy." And he turned away, scowling, and threw the shuttle across the loom, and the young king saw that it was threaded with a thread of gold. And a great terror seized upon him, and he said to the weaver, "What robe is this that thou art weaving?" "It is the robe for the coronation of the young king," he answered. "What is that to thee?" And the young king gave a loud cry and woke, and lo, he was in his own chamber, and through the window he saw the great honey-colored moon hanging in the dusky air. And he fell asleep again and dreamed, and this was his dream. He thought that he was lying on the deck of a huge galley that was being rowed by 100 slaves. On a carpet by his side, the master of the galley was seated. He was black as ebony, and his turban was of crimson silk. Great earrings of silver dragged down the thick lobes of his ears, and in his hands he had a pair of ivory scales. The slaves were naked but for a ragged loincloth, and each man was chained to his neighbor. The hot sun beat brightly upon them, and the Negroes ran up and down the gangway and lashed them with whips of hide. They stretched out their lean arms and pulled the heavy oars through the water. The salt spray flew from the blades. At last they reached a little bay and began to take soundings. A light wind blew from the shore and covered the deck and the great lateen sail with a fine red dust. 3 Arabs mounted on wild asses rode out and threw spears at them. The master of the galley took a painted bow in his hand and shot one of them in the throat. He fell heavily into the surf, and his companions galloped away. A woman wrapped in a yellow veil followed slowly on a camel, looking back now and then at the dead body. As soon as they had cast anchor and hauled down the sail, the Negroes went into the hold and brought up a long rope ladder, heavily weighted with lead. The master of the galley threw it over the side, making the ends fast to 2 iron stanchions. Then the Negroes seized the youngest of the slaves and knocked his gyves off, and filled his nostrils and his ears with wax, and tied a big stone round his waist. He crept wearily down the ladder and disappeared into the sea. A few bubbles rose where he sank. Some of the other slaves peered curiously over the side. At the prow of the galley sat a shark charmer, beating monotonously upon a drum. After some time, the diver rose up out of the water and clung panting to the ladder with a pearl in his right hand. The Negroes seized it from him and thrust him back. The slaves fell asleep over their oars. Again and again he came up, and each time that he did so, he brought with him a beautiful pearl. The master of the galley weighed them and put them into a little bag of green leather. The young king tried to speak, but his tongue seemed to cleave to the roof of his mouth, and his lips refused to move. The Negroes chattered to each other and began to quarrel over a string of bright beads. 2 cranes flew round and round the vessel. Then the diver came up for the last time, and the pearl that he brought with him was fairer than all the pearls of Ormuz, for it was shaped like the full moon and whiter than the morning star. But his face was strangely pale, and as he fell upon the deck, the blood gushed from his ears and nostrils. He quivered for a little, and then he was still. The Negroes shrugged their shoulders and threw the body overboard. And the master of the galley laughed, and reaching out, he took the pearl. And when he saw it, he pressed it to his forehead and bowed. "It shall be," he said, "for the scepter of the young king." And he made a sign to the Negroes to draw up the anchor. And when the young king heard this, he gave a great cry and woke. And through the window, he saw the long gray fingers of the dawn clutching at the fading stars. And he fell asleep again and dreamed, and this was his dream. He thought that he was wandering through a dim wood, hung with strange fruits and with beautiful poisonous flowers. The adders hissed at him as he went by, and the bright parrots flew screaming from branch to branch. Huge tortoises lay asleep upon the hot mud. The trees were full of apes and peacocks. On and on he went, till he reached the outskirts of the wood, and there he saw an immense multitude of men toiling in the bed of a dried-up river. They swarmed up the crag like ants. They dug deep pits in the ground and went down into them. Some of them cleft the rocks with great axes. Others grabbled in the sand. They tore up the cactus by its roots and trampled on the scarlet blossoms. They hurried about, calling to each other, and no man was idle. From the darkness of a cavern, Death and Avarice watched them, and Death said, "I am weary. Give me 1/3 of them and let me go." But Avarice shook her head. "They are my servants," she answered. And Death said to her, "What hast thou in thy hand?" "I have 3 grains of corn," she answered. "What is that to thee?" "Give me one of them," cried Death, "to plant in my garden. Only one of them, and I will go away." "I will not give thee anything," said Avarice, and she hid her hand in the fold of her raiment. And Death laughed, and took a cup, and dipped it into a pool of water, and out of the cup rose Ag. She passed through the great multitude, and 1/3 of them lay dead. A cold mist followed her, and the water snakes ran by her side. And when Avarice saw that 1/3 of the multitude was dead, She beat her breast and wept. She beat her barren bosom and cried aloud. Thou hast slain a third of my servants, she cried. Get thee gone. There is war in the mountains of Tartary, and the kings of each side are calling to thee. The Afghans have slain the black ox and are marching to battle. They have beaten upon their shields with their spears and have put on their helmets of iron. What is my valley to thee, that thou shouldst tarry in it? Get thee gone, and come here no more. Nay, answered Death, but till thou hast given me a grain of corn, I will not go. But Avarice shut her hand and clenched her teeth. I will not give thee anything, she muttered. And Death laughed and took up a black stone and threw it into the forest. And out of a thicket of wild hemlock came Fever in a robe of flame. She passed through the multitude and touched them, and each man that she touched died. The grass withered beneath her feet as she walked, and Avarice shuddered and put ashes on her head. Thou art cruel, she cried. Thou art cruel. There is famine in the walled cities of India, and the cisterns of Samarkand have run dry. There is famine in the walled cities of Egypt, and the locusts have come up from the desert. The Nile has not overflowed its banks, and the priests have cursed Isis and Osiris. Get thee gone to those who need thee, and leave me my servants. Nay, answered Death, but till thou hast given me a grain of corn, I will not go. I will not give thee anything, said Avarice. And Death laughed again, and he whistled through his fingers, and a woman came flying through the air. Plague was written upon her forehead, and a crowd of lean vultures wheeled round her. She covered the valley with her wings, and no man was left alive. And Avarice fled shrieking through the forest, and Death leaped upon his red horse and galloped away, and his galloping was faster than the wind. And out of the slime at the bottom of the valley crept dragons and horrible things with scales, and the jackals came trotting along the sand, sniffing up the air with their nostrils. And the young king wept and said, Who were these men, and for what were they seeking? For rubies for a king's crown, answered one who stood behind him. And the young king started, and turning round he saw a man habited as a pilgrim, and holding in his hand a mirror of silver, and he grew pale, and said, For what king? And the pilgrim answered, Look in this mirror, and thou shalt see him. And he looked in the mirror, and seeing his own face, he gave a great cry and woke, and the bright sunlight was streaming into the room, and from the trees of the garden and pleasaunce the birds were singing. And the chamberlain and the high officers of state came in and made obeisance to him, and the pages brought him the robe of tissued gold, and set the crown and the scepter before him. And the young king looked at them, and they were beautiful. More beautiful were they than aught that he had ever seen. But he remembered his dreams, and he said to his lords, Take these things away, for I will not wear them. And the courtiers were amazed, and some of them laughed, for they thought that he was jesting. But he spake sternly to them again, and said, Take these things away, and hide them from me. Though it be the day of my coronation, I will not wear them. For on the loom of sorrow, and by the white hands of pain, has this my robe been woven. There is blood in the heart of the ruby, and death in the heart of the pearl. And he told them his 3 dreams. And when the courtiers heard them, they looked at each other and whispered, saying, Surely he is mad. For what is a dream but a dream, and a vision but a vision? They are not real things that one should heed them. And what have we to do with the lives of those who toil for us? Shall a man not eat bread till he has seen the sower, nor drink wine till he has talked with the vine dresser? And the chamberlain spake to the young king, and said, My lord, I pray thee set aside these black thoughts of thine, and put on this fair robe, and set this crown upon thy head. For how shall the people know that thou art a king, if thou hast not a king's raiment? And the young king looked at him. "Is it so indeed?" he questioned. "Will they not know me for a king if I have not a king's raiment?" "They will not know thee, my lord," cried the chamberlain. "I had thought that there had been men who were king-like," he answered. "But it may be as thou sayest. And yet I will not wear this robe, nor will I be crowned with this crown. But even as I came to the palace, so will I go forth from it." And he bade them all leave him, save one page whom he kept as his companion, a lad a year younger than himself. Him he kept for his service, and when he had bathed himself in clear water, he opened a great painted chest, and from it he took the leathern tunic and rough sheepskin cloak that he had worn when he had watched on the hillside the shaggy goats of the goat herd. These he put on, and in his hand he took his rude shepherd's staff. And the little page opened his big blue eyes in wonder, and said, smiling to him, "My lord, I see thy robe and thy scepter, but where is thy crown?" And the young king plucked a spray of wild briar that was climbing over the balcony, and bent it, and made a circlet of it, and set it on his own head. "This shall he my crown," he answered. And thus attired, he passed out of his chamber into the great hall, where the nobles were waiting for him. And the nobles made merry, and some of them cried out to him, "My lord, the people wait for their king, and thou showest them a beggar." And others were wroth, and said, "He brings shame upon our state, and is unworthy to be our master." But he answered them not a word, but passed on, and went down the bright porphyry staircase, and out through the gates of bronze, and mounted upon his horse, and rode towards the cathedral, the little page running beside him. And the people laughed, and said, "It is the king's fool who is riding by." And they mocked him. And he drew rein, and said, "Nay, but I am the king." And he told them his 3 dreams. And a man came out of the crowd, and spake bitterly to him, and said, "Sir, knowest thou not that out of the luxury of the rich cometh the life of the poor? By your pomp we are nurtured, and your vices give us bread. To toil for a hard master is bitter, but to have no master to toil for is more bitter still. Thinkest thou that the ravens will feed us? And what cure hast thou for these things? Wilt thou say to the buyer, Thou shalt buy for so much, and to the seller, Thou shalt sell at this price? I trow not. Therefore, go back to thy palace, and put on thy purple and fine linen. What hast thou to do with us, and what we suffer?" "Are not the rich and the poor brothers?" asked the young king. "Aye," answered the man, "and the name of the rich brother is Cain." And the young king's eyes filled with tears, and he rode on through the murmurs of the people, and the little page grew afraid and left him. And when he reached the great portal of the cathedral, the soldiers thrust their halberds out, and said, "What dost thou seek here? None enters by this door but the king." And his face flushed with anger, and he said to them, "I am the king," and waved their halberds aside and passed in. And when the old bishop saw him coming in his goatherd's dress, he rose up in wonder from his throne, and went to meet him, and said to him, "My son, is this a king's apparel? And with what crown shall I crown thee, and what scepter shall I place in thy hand? Surely this should be to thee a day of joy, and not a day of abasement." "Shall joy wear what grief has fashioned?" said the young king. And he told him his 3 dreams. And when the bishop had heard them, he knit his brows, and said, "My son, I am an old man, and in the winter of my days, and I know that many evil things are done in the wide world. The fierce robbers come down from the mountains, and carry off the little children, and sell them to the Moors. The lions lie in wait for the caravans, and leap upon the camels. The wild boar roots up the corn in the valley, and the foxes gnaw the vines upon the hill. The pirates lay waste the sea coast, and burn the ships of the fishermen, and take their nets from them. In the salt marshes live the lepers. They have houses of wattled reeds, and none may come nigh them. The beggars wander through the cities, and eat their food with the dogs. Canst thou make these things not to be? Wilt thou take the leper for thy bedfellow, and set the beggar at thy board? Shall the lion do thy bidding, and the wild boar obey thee? Is not he who made misery wiser than thou art? Wherefore I praise thee not for this that thou hast done, but I bid thee ride back to the palace, and make thy face glad, and put on the raiment that beseemeth a king, and with the crown of gold I will crown thee, and the scepter of pearl will I place in thy hand. And as for thy dreams, think no more of them. The burden of this world is too great for one man to bear, and the world's sorrow too heavy for one heart to suffer. Sayest thou that in this house? Said the young king, and he strode past the bishop, and climbed up the steps of the altar, and stood before the image of Christ. He stood before the image of Christ, and on his right hand and on his left were the marvelous vessels of gold, the chalice with the yellow wine, and the vial with the holy oil. He knelt before the image of Christ, and the great candles burned brightly by the jeweled shrine, and the smoke of the incense curled in thin blue wreaths through the dome. He bowed his head in prayer, and the priests in their stiff copes crept away from the altar. And suddenly a wild tumult came from the street outside, and in entered the nobles with drawn swords and nodding plumes, and shields of polished steel. Where is this dreamer of dreams? They cried. Where is this king who is apparelled like a beggar, this boy who brings shame upon our state? Surely we will slay him, for he is unworthy to rule over us. And the young king bowed his head again and prayed. And when he had finished his prayer, he rose up, and turning round he looked at them sadly. And lo, through the painted windows came the sunlight streaming upon him, and the sunbeams wove round him a tissued robe that was fairer than the robe that had been fashioned for his pleasure. The dead staff blossomed and bare lilies that were whiter than pearls. The dry thorn blossomed and bare roses that were redder than rubies. Whiter than fine pearls were the lilies, and their stems were of bright silver. Redder than male rubies were the roses, and their leaves were of beaten gold. He stood there in the raiment of a king, and the gates of the jeweled shrine flew open, and from the crystal of the many-rayed monstrance shone a marvelous and mystical light. He stood there in a king's raiment, and the glory of God filled the place, and the saints in their carven niches seemed to move. In the fair raiment of a king he stood before them, and the organ pealed out its music, and the trumpeters blew upon their trumpets, and the singing boys sang, and the people fell upon their knees in awe, and the nobles sheathed their swords and did homage, and the bishop's face grew pale, and his hands trembled. A greater than I hath crowned thee, he cried, and he knelt before him. And the young king came down from the high altar, and passed home through the midst of the people, but no man dared look upon his face, for it was like the face of an angel. The Selfish Giant by Oscar Wilde. Every afternoon, as they were coming from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a large, lovely garden with soft green grass. Here and there over the grass stood beautiful flowers like stars, and there were 12 peach trees that, in the springtime, broke out into delicate blossoms of pink and pearl, and in the autumn bore rich fruit. The birds sat on the trees and sang so sweetly that the children used to stop their games in order to listen to them. "How happy we are here," they cried to each other. One day, the giant came back. He had been to visit his friend, the Cornish ogre, and had stayed with him for 7 years. After the 7 years were over, he had said all that he had to say, for his conversation was limited, and he determined to return to his own castle. When he arrived, he saw the children playing in the garden. "What are you doing here?" he cried in a very gruff voice, and the children ran away. "My own garden is my own garden," said the giant. "Anyone can understand that, and I will allow nobody to play in it but myself." So he built a high wall all round it and put up a notice board. "Trespassers will be prosecuted." He was a very selfish giant. The poor children had now nowhere to play. They tried to play on the road, but the road was very dusty and full of hard stones, and they did not like it. They used to wander around the high wall when their lessons were over and talk about the beautiful garden inside. How happy we were there, they said to each other. Then the spring came, and all over the country there were little blossoms and little birds. Only in the garden of the selfish giant it was still winter. The birds did not care to sing in it, as there were no children, and the trees forgot to blossom. Once a beautiful flower put its head out from the grass, but when it saw the notice board, it was so sorry for the children that it slipped back into the ground again and went off to sleep. The only people who were pleased were the snow and the frost. "Spring has forgotten this garden," they cried, "so we will live here all the year round." The snow covered up the grass with her great white cloak, and the frost painted all the trees silver. Then they invited the north wind to stay with them, and he came. He was wrapped in furs, and he roared all day about the garden and blew the chimney pots down. "This is a delightful spot," he said. "We must ask the hail on a visit." So the hail came. Every day for 3 hours he rattled on the roof of the castle till he broke most of the slates, and then he ran round and round the garden as fast as he could go. He was dressed in gray, and his breath was like ice. "I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming," said the selfish giant, as he sat at the window and looked out at his cold white garden. "I hope there will be a change in the weather." But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruit to every garden, but to the giant's garden she gave none. "He is too selfish," she said. So it was always winter there, and the north wind, and the hail, and the frost, and the snow danced about through the trees. One morning the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard some lovely music. It sounded so sweet to his ears that he thought it must be the king's musicians passing by. It was really only a little linnet singing outside his window, but it was so long since he had heard a bird sing in his garden that it seemed to him to be the most beautiful music in the world. Then the hail stopped dancing over his head, and the north wind ceased roaring, and a delicious perfume came to him through the open casement. "I believe the spring has come at last," said the giant, and he jumped out of bed and looked out. What did he see? He saw a most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall the children had crept in, and they were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree that he could see there was a little child, and the trees were so glad to have the children back again that they had covered themselves with blossoms and were waving their arms gently above the children's heads. The birds were flying about and twittering with delight, and the flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. It was a lovely scene, only in one corner it was still winter. It was the farthest corner of the garden, and in it was standing a little boy. He was so small that he could not reach up to the branches of the tree, and he was wandering all round it, crying bitterly. The poor tree was still quite covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was blowing and roaring above it. "Climb up, little boy," said the tree, and it bent its branches down as low as it could, but the boy was too tiny, and the giant's heart melted as he looked out. "How selfish I have been," he said. "Now I know why the spring would not come here. I will put that poor little boy on the top of the tree, and then I will knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground forever and ever." He was really very sorry for what he had done. So he crept downstairs and opened the front door quite softly and went out into the garden. But when the children saw him, they were so frightened that they all ran away, and the garden became winter again. Only the little boy did not run, for his eyes were so full of tears that he did not see the giant coming. And the giant stole up behind him and took him gently in his hand and put him up into the tree. And the tree broke at once into blossom, and the birds came and sang on it, and the little boy stretched out his 2 arms and flung them round the giant's neck and kissed him. And the other children, when they saw that the giant was not wicked any longer, came running back and with them came the spring. "It is your garden now, little children," said the giant, and he took a great axe and knocked down the wall. And when the people were going to market at 12 o'clock, they found the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden they had ever seen. All day long they played, and in the evening they came to the giant to bid him goodbye. "But where is your little companion?" he said, "the boy I put into the tree." The giant loved him the best because he had kissed him. "We don't know," answered the children. "He has gone away." "You must tell him to be sure and come here tomorrow," said the giant. But the children said that they did not know where he lived and had never seen him before, and the giant felt very sad. Every afternoon when school was over, the children came and played with the giant, but the little boy whom the giant loved was never seen again. The giant was very kind to all the children, yet he longed for his first little friend, and often spoke of him. "How I would like to see him," he used to say. Years went over, and the giant grew very old and feeble. He could not play about anymore, so he sat in a huge armchair and watched the children at their games, and admired his garden. "I have many beautiful flowers," he said, "but the children are the most beautiful flowers of all." One winter morning he looked out of his window as he was dressing. He did not hate the winter now, for he knew that it was merely the spring asleep, and that the flowers were resting. Suddenly he rubbed his eyes in wonder, and looked and looked. It certainly was a marvelous sight. In the farthest corner of the garden was a tree quite covered with lovely white blossoms. Its branches were all golden, and silver fruit hung down from them, and underneath it stood the little boy he had loved. Downstairs ran the giant in great joy, and out into the garden. He hastened across the grass and came near to the child. And when he came quite close, his face grew red with anger, and he said, "Who hath dared to wound thee?" For on the palms of the child's hands were the prints of 2 nails, and the prints of 2 nails were on the little feet. "Who hath dared to wound thee?" cried the giant. "Tell me, that I may take my big sword and slay him." "Nay," answered the child, "but these are the wounds of love." "Who art thou?" said the giant, and a strange awe fell on him, and he knelt before the little child. And the child smiled on the giant and said to him, "You let me play once in your garden. Today you shall come with me to my garden, which is paradise." And when the children ran in that afternoon, they found the giant lying dead under the tree, all covered with white blossoms.